What would you do if you discovered the prisoner accused of killing a soldier was the same man who saved your father's life in the war? That is the impossible reality facing Dr. Elena Morales. Her new patient is Elijah Cole, a veteran locked away for a friendly fire incident. He's dying, and his only focus is building a wooden cross, one that holds a 20-year-old secret. If you believe that the sacrifices of our soldiers must be told, please like this video and subscribe so these hidden truths can come to light. Stay with us, because this is the true story of a cover-up and a final act of grace carved in wood. On her first morning inside the prison clinic, Dr. Elena Morales noticed how quiet the place was. Not the kind of quiet that brought peace, the kind that held secrets. She'd volunteered for this rotation thinking she could help veterans heal from their wounds. But no one told her that the worst wounds weren't the ones stitched shut. They were the ones that never stopped bleeding on the inside. Elena was 28, still new enough to believe medicine could fix what guilt had broken. She'd grown up in San Antonio, daughter of a Marine who came home from Afghanistan, with scars that words couldn't touch. Her father rarely spoke of the war, only that some debts can't be repaid. She never understood what he meant, not yet. That morning, she was handed her patient list. At the bottom, Cole, Elijah, 62, cardiac irregularities, right-hand laceration. The guard warned, "He's one of the lifers. Killed a soldier. Don't get too friendly." Elena nodded. But something about those words, "killed a soldier," felt heavier than fact. When she entered the workshop, the smell of oak and oil hung in the air. The old man sat hunched over a wooden beam, his hand wrapped in a strip of torn cloth. He didn't look up until she spoke. "Mr. Cole?" He glanced over his shoulder. "You the new doc?" "Army Reserve Medical Corps," she replied, kneeling beside him. "Looks like you've been bleeding for a while." He gave a half smile. Wood bites back sometimes. As she cleaned the cut, she saw his fingers, rough, scarred, trembling slightly. But each move he made over the cross was precise, deliberate, almost reverent. "You're building this for the chapel?" she asked. He nodded. "They tore the old one down years ago. Figured the place could use another." She paused, curious. "Why a cross?" He looked at her, eyes gray like ash. "Because even sinners need something to hold on to." The line lingered. There was no bitterness in his voice, only truth. For a moment, Elena forgot where they were. The sound of hammering, the cold concrete, the distant buzz of fluorescent lights, all faded. She saw a man, not a prisoner. Someone's husband, someone's father. When she left the workshop, the guard asked, "How was the killer carpenter?" She didn't answer. Because what she saw wasn't a killer. It was a man trying to make peace with something far greater than a courtroom. That night, as she updated his file, she added one line beneath the medical notes. "Patient stable. Displays signs of chronic guilt and deep faith." Then she whispered to herself, "Maybe that's not such a bad combination." Outside, the chapel lights flickered faintly against the walls, and somewhere inside, an old man kept carving his redemption one piece of wood at a time. For weeks, Elena kept finding excuses to visit the workshop. She told herself it was for medical checks, blood pressure, wound care, pulse monitoring. But deep down, she knew it was something else. There was something about Elijah Cole that drew her in. Not attraction, not pity, but a strange kind of gravity. The kind you feel when standing next to someone who's seen hell and somehow still believes in heaven. One afternoon, she arrived to find him sitting still, staring at a piece of wood he hadn't touched. "You okay, Sergeant?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Ever notice how wood has memory? You press too hard in one place, it cracks. Doesn't matter how careful you are after that. The mark stays." She thought about her father, the nightmares, the empty stare whenever someone mentioned Afghanistan. "People are like that too," she said quietly. "Yeah," Elijah nodded. "Some of us split where nobody can see." Later that day, she looked up his records in the prison system. Charge, murder in the 2nd degree. Details, friendly fire incident. Outcome, 1 soldier dead. Sergeant Cole refused to appeal. She stared at the file, unsettled. The reports didn't line up. Too many blanks, too many voices missing. She shut the screen and leaned back. For the first time, she felt doubt not toward him, but toward the system that condemned him. The next morning, she met the prison chaplain, a gentle man with tired eyes. "Tell me about Elijah Cole," she said. The chaplain sighed. "He's not the monster they wrote down. He used to run a church carpentry club for veterans, built benches, repaired homes. He lost his wife during his first sentence hearing, never went back to church after that. But he still prays. What does he pray for? Not freedom, forgiveness." That word stayed with her the whole night, forgiveness. She couldn't stop wondering what kind of man chose to stay silent when the truth could have saved him. The next time she saw him, he was sanding the beam of the cross with his injured hand, blood seeping through the gauze. "You shouldn't work like that," she said. He smiled faintly. "Pain reminds me I'm still paying what I owe." "You don't owe anyone your blood," she said. He looked up, his voice soft but unshakable. "Ma'am, the blood isn't for them. It's for me." Elena stood there, speechless. She'd treated soldiers, addicts, men broken by wars, but none like him. His calmness scared her more than any anger could. As she left, she glanced back through the small window in the door. Eli was still there, working under the pale light, every motion steady and deliberate. And for the first time, she realized this wasn't just a man finishing a cross. This was a man trying to build his way back to God. One splinter, one breath, one prayer at a time. It was raining that afternoon, the kind of slow, gray rain that made even metal walls look tired. Elena stood by the barred window of the infirmary, watching drops slide down the glass, each one tracing a thin, trembling path. She'd been at Fort Leavenworth for 3 months now, and somehow, every day felt heavier, except when she found herself in the workshop. That was where Elijah Cole lived, in the scent of sawdust and oil, surrounded by half-shaped wood and quiet faith. When she walked in, he was humming an old hymn, "Just as I Am." His hands were shaking, but his strokes with the chisel were still steady, like he'd carved his rhythm straight from his heartbeat. "You shouldn't be working with that hand," she said. He didn't stop. "If I wait for it to heal, it never will." "You sound like my father," she murmured, taking the tool from him. "He used to say that after the war." That made him pause. "Your father served?" "Marine Corps, Afghanistan, 2010. He looked up sharply, a flicker of something crossing his face. Recognition or pain, she couldn't tell. "Tough year," he said quietly. She smiled faintly. "He doesn't talk about it. Just says the world looked different after that." Eli nodded. "It always does." She began rewrapping his hand. Her touch was gentle, but her eyes were studying him. The faded tattoo on his forearm, the burned scars, the strange tenderness behind his silence. "Do you ever think about leaving this place?" she asked. He chuckled softly. "You mean prison?" "I mean the war." He stared at the half-finished cross. "You can't leave a war that's still inside you." Her throat tightened. She thought about her father again, how he'd sit alone in the garage, fixing the same engine over and over, as if trying to repair something deeper than the machine. "Maybe that's why I'm here," she said. "To help people leave it behind." Eli smiled faintly. "Or maybe you're here so it doesn't leave you." The next day, when she returned, she found something new. On the back of the cross, hidden behind the grain, Eli had carved a small row of names. Rough, uneven letters, cut deep into the wood. "Who are they?" she asked. He wiped his hands. "Men who didn't make it home." "And the last one?" she asked, pointing to the unfinished space at the end. He hesitated. "That one's for the man I failed to save." There was no anger in his voice, just grief that had learned how to breathe. When she walked back to her quarters that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that those names weren't just carved into wood. They were carved into him. And somewhere between the sound of the rain and the creak of the prison gates closing, Elena realized she wasn't just treating a patient anymore. She was tending to a man who had already buried everything he loved, except the part of himself still trying to believe that grace could reach even here. It happened on a Sunday morning when the world outside the prison smelled of rain and wet asphalt. Inside the workshop, sunlight slipped through the narrow windows, falling across the wooden cross like gold. Elijah was polishing the beam with quiet focus, the rhythm steady, like prayer in motion. Elena stood nearby, sorting medical forms, though she wasn't really reading them. Her eyes kept drifting toward him. "You ever get tired of it?" she asked softly. "Of what?" "Building something that might never leave this place." He smiled faintly. "Everything we build leaves a mark somewhere, even if nobody sees it." As he spoke, something slipped from his shirt pocket, a small, burned piece of metal, a dog tag, scarred and blackened by heat. Elena picked it up, the name barely visible, D. Morales. Her hands froze. "That's my father's name," she whispered. Eli looked up, eyes clouding with memory. "He was a Marine, wasn't he?" Her voice trembled. "Yes, Daniel Morales. Kandahar. He was caught in an explosion. They told us a soldier pulled him out before the truck went up." For a long moment, neither spoke. The hum of the fluorescent light was the only sound between them. "I didn't know his name," Eli said finally. "Just that he was breathing when they dragged me away." Elena's voice broke. "You saved him, and they said you killed someone." He nodded. "Both things can be true." Tears filled her eyes. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" He turned back to the wood. "Because proving I was innocent would have meant proving someone else was guilty. I couldn't do that to a man who already lost enough." Elena sank onto the bench beside him, shaking. She thought of all the nights her father had woken screaming, all the times he said, "Some debts can't be repaid." Now she understood why. "You carried this all alone," she said. He smiled gently. "No, ma'am. God carried it. I just walked slow." For the first time, she reached out and touched the cross. Rough, unfinished, alive. "He always wondered who saved him," she said. "Now I have to tell him." Eli shook his head. "Don't. Let him keep his peace. Some stories aren't meant to come full circle." But Elena couldn't let go. She looked at the burned tag again, feeling the weight of two lives bound by one act of grace. That night, she called her father. "Dad," she said, voice trembling, "do you remember the soldier who pulled you from the wreck?" There was silence, then a soft answer. "Every day. His name was Elijah Cole." A long pause, then a sound she'd never heard from him before. A quiet, breaking sob. When she returned to the prison the next morning, she found Eli already working. He didn't ask what she'd done. He just said, "You look lighter." And she smiled through tears. "Maybe because I finally understand what forgiveness looks like." He nodded, his hand resting on the cross. "It's not clean," he said. "It's not easy. But it's the only thing that makes the scars worth something." And in that still room, beneath the hum of prison lights, Elena realized this wasn't a story about a guilty man or an innocent one. It was about two souls, bound by war, finally finding the same quiet mercy. One through blood, and the other through truth. Winter crept into Kansas early that year. The cold slipped through every crack in the walls, turning breath into mist and metal into ice. The prison felt quieter, heavier, as if even the air had learned to hold its sorrow. Elena walked through the empty corridor toward the chapel, her steps echoing softly. She'd barely slept since telling her father the truth. His voice still haunted her, the way it broke when he said Elijah's name. She hadn't told Eli that her father wanted to come see him. She knew the rules, and she knew Eli's heart. He wouldn't allow it. When she entered the workshop, Eli was sitting on the floor beside the cross, his face pale, his breath uneven. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. He smiled weakly. "If I stop now, it'll never be finished." His hand trembled as he reached for the chisel. Blood had soaked through his bandage again. "Elijah, please," she begged. Your heart can't take this. He chuckled softly. My heart stopped belonging to me a long time ago. She knelt beside him, wrapping his hand, tears threatening to fall. Why do you keep punishing yourself? He looked up, eyes clouded but steady. Because I need to finish something that means more than my mistakes. He nodded toward the cross. That's the only thing I'll ever leave behind that isn't broken. Outside, thunder rolled, deep and distant. It sounded like the echo of war. By nightfall, the guards had ordered all inmates back to their cells, but Elena stayed. She convinced Major Whitaker to let her keep watch over him through the night. You're crossing lines, Doctor, Whitaker warned. Elena met her gaze. So did he when he saved my father. The major said nothing more. Later, in the quiet of the chapel, Eli kept working. The light from a single lamp flickered against the oak. His breathing grew shallow, each motion slower than the last. I think he's almost ready to take me, he murmured. Don't say that. He smiled faintly. Why not? I've been carving my confession for years. Elena took the chisel from his hand. Then let me help. Together, they shaped the last edge of the beam. When it was done, Eli reached into his pocket, pulling out a folded piece of paper, a short prayer written in his unsteady script. Read it for me, he whispered. She unfolded it, voice trembling. Lord, I don't ask to be remembered for the wars I fought, but for the things I tried to make whole again. When she looked up, Eli's head had fallen back against the wood, his eyes closed, lips parted as if in mid-prayer. Elijah, she whispered. No answer. The chisel slipped from her hand, clattering against the floor. For a moment, time didn't move. Then she stood, shaking, and reached for the blade. Her hand guided itself to the base of the cross. With slow, deliberate strokes, she carved the words he'd always meant to finish. Forgiven by grace. Her tears fell onto the fresh wood, blending with the stains of his blood. Outside, dawn began to break. Light spilled through the window, soft and gold, resting on the man who'd finally laid down his burden, and the woman who'd picked up what was left of his faith. The chapel smelled of fresh paint and sawdust as the morning they hung the cross. A small group gathered inside, guards, the chaplain, a few inmates standing in silence, hands folded. The air felt thick with something sacred, the kind of quiet that makes you whisper even when you're alone. Elena stood near the back, her uniform crisp, her eyes red from sleepless nights. The cross stood at the front of the chapel, simple yet powerful. Oak darkened by oil, its edges smoothed by the same hands that had once held a rifle. And there, carved at the base, were the words, "Forgiven by grace." The chaplain cleared his throat. Sergeant Elijah Cole left this behind not as a monument to himself, but as a message. To remind us that forgiveness isn't earned by perfection, but by surrender. Elena's chest tightened. She thought of the first day she met him, the quiet man sanding wood, speaking more with silence than words. Now that silence filled the whole room. When the service ended, she stayed behind. The guards turned off the lights, but the morning sun had already spilled through the window, lighting the cross in gold. She walked forward, fingertips brushing the letters she had carved. A tear slid down her cheek as she whispered, "You finished it, Eli. You really did." The chapel door creaked open behind her. Her father stood there, Daniel Morales, older, thinner, his shoulders still carrying the invisible weight of war. He hadn't stepped into a church in over a decade. Now, he walked slowly down the aisle until he stood beside her. His voice was rough, low. "That's him?" Elena nodded. "He saved you." Daniel reached out, resting his calloused hand on the wood. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then his fingers traced the words, and his voice cracked as he whispered, "Forgiven by grace." Something broke open inside him. Not grief, but peace. The kind that comes when you finally stop running from ghosts. They stood together in the quiet, father and daughter, the morning light washing over them. Outside, the world went on. The hum of trucks, the clang of gates, the same rhythm of life. that forgets too easily. But here, in this small chapel, time stood still. Elena looked up at the cross one last time. The grain of the wood caught the light like ripples on water. It wasn't perfect. There were cracks, uneven lines, places where the chisel had slipped, and somehow that made it more beautiful. She turned to her father and said softly, "He once told me, the wood remembers the hand that shapes it. Maybe Grace does too." Daniel smiled. A small, broken smile that felt like healing. As they walked out together, the camera would have stayed behind, lingering on the cross. The sound of footsteps fading, the echo of their breath, and the last line, spoken in a gentle, aged voice that carried both sorrow and hope. He died behind bars, but lived a free man. Because forgiveness isn't about escaping what you've done. It's about finally believing you're still worthy of love. The doors closed, leaving only the cross, bathed in light. A silent promise carved by a man who had nothing left to give except his faith.